Okay. Thank you all for bearing with me as I set up. Again, I'm Angie Kammermeyer. I'm the Chief Nursing Officer from Integris Health Edmond, and I want you to know among the cast of people that you have speaking before you today and probably yesterday, I'm probably the least experienced in breastfeeding. But I did want to come and talk to you from a nursing administrator's perspective on what I've learned in the lessons over the years from going to a position of neutrality and in some ways neutrality, whether somebody wanted to breastfeed or not breastfeed, is not always really that helpful, especially when we're trying to go to an age where breastfeeding, that we're all advocating for breastfeeding. So I want you all to know that for many years, when I was supporting patients as a brand new nurse, and for 15 years after that, if someone came into the hospital and they said what their breastfeeding choice was, we just accepted it and, we supported that decision. And there was a time in my career where I had an opportunity to go into management, and that management actually took me away from the women's services, and I ended up becoming a chief nursing officer in different hospitals. I've been chief nursing officer at Midwest City, at Southwest Medical Center, and now at Integris Health Edmond. In each of those transitions, I got a little bit further away from my expertise clinically in those areas. And I don't mean to say that as a confession. It's just the reality of what happens when your career evolves and changes into different things. And so the tendency to recall and remember what it was like when you were a nurse, you kind of leave it where it was. And then at a different point in time, you may have to pick it back up. So where this picks back up is our hospital's journey to baby friendly, as well as my need to go back to school and study as a student in the DMP program at OU. So this is kind of where my aha came, and I wanted to share that story with you because I think I might be able to provide you insights if you're working with administrators or even people that are influential in decision-making as to whether you're going to go baby-friendly or not. I don't know if there's anyone in this room that might be at that transitional point. But as we all know, baby-friendly does require that not only at the level of the department in that clinical setting, but also to the boardroom, that everyone is on board with baby-friendly initiatives and that breastfeeding advocacy is fully present. So I'm hopeful that by the end of the presentation that I've been able to talk about mother's choice as being important, but there are factors that influence breastfeeding in the U.S. And I wanted to explore in a broad context the economic, social, and political factors that influence breastfeeding. And these factors elevated my interest and active support for the baby-friendly journey at my hospital. And I'll also offer some talking points for those of you that are interested. I have handouts that I've prepared prior to coming here today to share with you. So what is the issue? My discoveries began with a project to identify a global health issue that also needed to be a local issue. So when I was in my course, it was probably a year ago when I started studying breastfeeding. It was about world hunger, and I know that sounds like, wow, that's really big, Ange. So then I had to narrow it down, and when I narrowed it down to infant malnutrition and then suboptimal breastfeeding. And so I chose to study that and focused on that because it's considered one of the leading attributable risk factors to population health. So many researchers concur that as many as 1.4 million child deaths worldwide are associated with suboptimal breastfeeding, and even with known risk among young child morbidity and mortality, women who ever breastfeed using breast milk substitutes by 6 months. It's a declining rate substantially. So while the method of infant feeding is still an individual choice, there are factors that impact the normalcy of breastfeeding that are deeply seated in our society, and it's not just about that choice whether I'm going to breastfeed or not. There are big influencers that over time have added to the complexity. So when we think about the solution, to begin finding a new body of evidence that supported whole life benefit was remarkably changed over time. That was one of my discoveries when I thought, what new is there to breastfeeding? In that breastfeeding promotes health by reducing the incidence of disease. I learned that it promoted growth and development, and that it reduced the risk of future chronic illness such as obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. And the World Health Organization and UNICEF recommended that breastfeeding is initiated within an hour after birth and exclusively for the first 6 months with the introduction of appropriate foods for up to 2 years. This is most likely not new information to most of you in this room, but if you're trying to influence a decision maker who's unfamiliar with the changes over time, it's important to know and important to have as part of your talking points when you're trying to influence a decision maker. And you've probably seen this earlier today because I know Becky probably covered this, but in the CDC report from 2014, it indicated that in the U.S. only 79% of women ever breastfeed, with a sharp decline in breastfeeding exclusivity by 6 months. And in Oklahoma, that rate is similar, a little bit lower than the national average. So if it's normal and best, why do we not treat it as the norm? So then I started trying to figure out, well, how did normal ever unravel? Because I thought normal was allowing people to have the choice between breastfeeding and bottle feeding. I'm just telling you, that's kind of what was in my head. So as I said at the beginning, I did not give it a second thought to the norms of that day. And I think most of us who worked in hospital settings were trained this way. We just learned that the norms of accepting what people wanted for choice was kind of what we did. And that we were oriented to them also in the workplace. So they were reinforced as we were working. I remember the day where we readily gave out pacifiers, and if a baby was crying excessively in the nursery, instead of trying to encourage them to go to the mom, we would give them sugar water. Some of you may remember those days, and hopefully those days are short and not fully present as they used to be. I also remember the day when we gave away bears and bunnies, and you all know bears and bunnies probably give you the image of infant formula. And we would, be giving out our discharge packets that had, bottles of infant formula mixed in powder. And, we even made it available to our employees at home. If somebody was breastfeeding even, we would allow them to contact the sales rep, and the sales rep would do a home delivery and give you, free formula and stuff like that. Yeah, those were the 80s and the 90s. Do y'all remember that? Does anyone remember that? So times have definitely changed, but when you're talking to a nurse administrator that hadn't been in practice for about 15 years, that's kind of where people remember it to be. So they're not necessarily aware of the changes that have taken place. So then I started looking at, well, what is it that influences breastfeeding beyond that choice? And it's really a complex, there are 3 complex areas that represent that, and it's economic, social, and political factors. So breastfeeding rates began declining worldwide in the 1840s, and this change was associated with the manufacturing of breast milk substitutes. And prior to this time, breastfeeding was the norm. So from the beginning of time to the 1840s, everybody breastfed because we didn't know that there was anything else to do, and that was normal. But when we started manufacturing breast milk substitutes, that's when things started to change. And so the decline of breastfeeding was associated not only with the decline in the introduction of breast milk substitutes was not only associated with the decline in breastfeeding, but it was also associated with an increase in infant mortality. So getting into the economic factors, the industrialized economy transformed America into a capitalistic and democratic society. As such, political and economic systems converged, and the economic growth between 1945 and 1975 promoted mass production. And so society benefited from this economic growth, and breast milk substitutes were manufactured, marketed, and distributed worldwide. Companies that manufactured breast milk substitutes became billion-dollar industries. Political factors also played a role in that in the 1970s, unethical marketing of breast milk substitutes were brought to the attention of Senator Edward Kennedy. And in the Senate meeting, the issue of unethical marketing of breastfeeding or breast milk substitutes was recommended for referral to the World Health Organization. And as a result, the International Code for Marketing Breastfeeding was established. And the U.S. was the only country that voted no. Then the Innocenti Declaration of 1990 was another attempt from the world health leaders to promote breastfeeding and reinforce the International Code of Marketing Breastfeeding Products. The U.S. again did not adopt it. At this point, I had a special meeting with Becky Mantle because I was like, why did this happen? And so we kind of deliberated over a cup of coffee, and then she asked me to come speak to this conference the next year. So anyway. Okay, so then there's other things. The World Health Organization commissioned a task force in 2005 to address inequities in healthcare through the lens of social determinants. And through this work, the Commission on Social Determinants was established and identified that the most important determinants affecting healthcare was income, education, occupation, economic class, gender, race, and ethnicity. I also want to talk about power because, in addition, the Commission reported on theories of power and social status. And there was a positive association identified between social status and economic position. And the reason why the concept of power is introduced goes back to the fact that baby food companies are billion-dollar industries and are influential in policy making. And so did the economic position of baby food companies influence policy not to endorse the International Code of Marketing Breastfeeding or breast milk substitutes? Was that the reason? I don't know. But you all might form your opinion or have your opinion about that. Still today, baby food companies and companies who sell baby food products that include breast milk substitutes enter developing countries under world hunger campaigns. And do we think that these actions, although well-intended, may affect the breastfeeding rates in the future? So there's an undercurrent that worldwide is still happening, and under philanthropic initiatives, breast milk substitutes are being introduced and marketed in developing countries. And that takes us to think about clean water and teaching people how to do the formula and, mix it and all this other kind of stuff. Are we really making progress? Just asking the question. And so then we go to advocacy and social justice, and these are really big terms, but you all in my DMP program, they make your mind go way out in orbit to bring you back down to earth. So this is where I went. So the level of passion that you have on an issue will affect how far you take an issue to advocacy and even further on to influence change. So any change in health policy requires advocacy. And it's described as a process to raise awareness of an issue related to self on behalf of others. It's also been suggested that advocacy is applied to a wide range of stratified issues, including individual, institution, community, and global levels. At these various levels, again, you have safety, political, social, and ethical factors to look at. But advocacy and social justice have been described together. Social justice applied to nursing means to advocate change and practice to the social structures that create inequities and disparities in health care. So social justice has been described as fairness of society and the distribution of rewards and burdens. The distinction between advocacy and social justice is that social justice is much broader, and it's focused on a broad community or population health promotion. Where you sit on this scale, whether it's at a local level or at a global level, in time, you can invest and make a difference. So even at a local level, you can affect in your own practice setting, you can affect the globalization in the advocacy that you want of an issue. So taking this along to action steps, where do you go, or where did I go to affect advocacy and breastfeeding. Well, taking action on advocacy impacts my practice as a nurse administrator in a positive way. And factors to consider advocacy include safety, social, political, and ethical and financial implications. So breastfeeding health promotion motivates my decision to strategically support the baby-friendly initiative and the philosophies that the Innocenti Declaration, as well as the International Marketing Code supported. These represent fundamental positions designed to protect mothers and support breastfeeding. Safety as a factor is relative to the position of mothers and breastfeeding, and ensuring their rights are respected in their decision to breastfeed. And identifying opportunities to promote safety can be accomplished when drawing attention and awareness to the issues. And understanding the sensitivities around social political factors is important for influencing the support that breastfeeding plays as a major role in developing alliances for social justice and human rights. Creating community awareness for breastfeeding advocacy is needed to support new mothers to continue to breastfeed after initiation, and financial factors that infant formula was provided free of charge in hospitals until baby-friendly initiatives came about, in which hospitals began to pay for the formula and not distribute it unless it was for medical need. So how do we maximize the positive impact? Beyond these factors, additional steps are needed to maximize the positive impact on practice. And one of the first steps of advocacy is to take action on an issue. So a step to take is knowing what contributes to a well-articulated point of view and being able to identify people with special interest groups and policymakers that influence breastfeeding policy. Oops. Wait a minute. I got new glasses and I'm having a hard time seeing this. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, and advocacy at all levels can promote the changes that we need to see to promote breastfeeding at local, state, national, and global levels. So expanding beyond the local level of advocacy can impact the globalization of healthcare by reducing the leading risk for population health that protects mothers, infants, and young children with optimal nutrition in early life or whole life. So I have, as I said, I have talking points that include some of the resources that you see up here, and I can distribute those. They're handouts. Okay. It's a collection of information from the World Health Organization, from UNICEF. There's talking points from the CDC. Things that are current are Oklahoma bills that support breastfeeding in the workplace, the Affordable Care Act, and how it supports breastfeeding advocacy, the Surgeon General's call to action, Healthy People 2020. There's a ton of resources that are out there that, as you are trying to influence policymakers and nurse administrators like myself, that you would be able to take advantage of. So, and these are my leadership lessons. You know, when I first started out, I said I was not a breastfeeding expert, but I am a nurse administrator, and these were the things that I learned from my discoveries in advocating for breastfeeding. And really, Baby Friendly provides a great framework for us to be able to implement advocacy at the local setting, whatever our practice setting might be. So breastfeeding is a national priority, and it is the normal. Breast milk is the perfect food for infants, and it provides whole life benefits. Laws that protect breastfeeding mothers are not fully enforced. They're out there, but you can tell in the workplace that sometimes we're just not fully enforcing, or we're not supporting moms that are breastfeeding in the workplace. Marketing breast milk substitutes is associated with the decline of breastfeeding worldwide, and economic, social, and political factors influence the breastfeeding rate. Advocacy is needed at all levels, and the Baby Friendly Hospital Initiative is the perfect framework to be able to accomplish those things. So in the end, I do want to conclude my presentation, and I would like to end by saying that taking action with advocacy impacts my practice as a nurse administrator But what you do every day to promote breastfeeding impacts the health of women and children and matters greatly and deeply at the beginning of life. But that is not only at the beginning of life, it's whole life to the very end of life. And I wish to acknowledge my team, Evelyn Radischel, Clinical Director of the Women's Center, Lauren Bailey, who's the Clinical Nurse Manager, and Becky Drebitz. And I think they're in this room, but I haven't spotted them yet. They're over there. Hello. Anyway, they have been on this baby-friendly journey with me together for quite some time, and we are in the final phases, so we're happy to announce that. But we're even taking it to the level of being able to offer in the community a baby cafe, which some of you probably already participate in. But we want to have one more additional place for women to come and be supported in their efforts to breastfeed. I also want to thank Becky Mantle, who sought my help to answer questions that I couldn't get from a book, and that your passion, Becky, wherever you are right now, is a treasure. And I certainly appreciate your friendship and your expertise in this. So, any questions? Anyone dealing with issues with people that they're trying to convince that that baby-friendly initiative is a good idea? Everybody in the room? So, yes, ma'am.
If you were suddenly decided, I'm done with being a CNO, I'm going to go back to patient care, and you walked into labor and delivery again, how would you handle that conversation now with a mom about, it's your choice, Mom, whatever you want to do, I'll support you?
I would, I think that by the time that someone comes to that clinical setting, that they've already kind of made their mind up. So in the end, I would be supportive. But I think in the middle, I would educate them and provide them one last opportunity, because once you pass that by, you really do pass that by. And not only for the moment or the time that they're in the hospital, but to be able to offer them education and continued support for when they're, when they get home. Because when they get home, they're in that environment that with social determinants where they have grandma that says, oh, just give them a bottle, or somebody else that says, oh, don't do that in public, or, all the other factors that get in the way and really don't support moms that are breastfeeding. So I think what I would do is just educate and teach and provide what I didn't provide, before. I just accepted before. Is that far from what people are doing now? Do people just accept whatever when a patient comes in and says, I'm wanting to bottle feed, do we just accept that? Yeah. So, yes. I will tell you something, and I'm going to be transparent because that's just me. Right, Evelyn? My president bottle fed her baby, and at the time, her baby had been born prematurely and was in the nursery. And so, perhaps at that time, and we're talking about the 80s, we didn't know quite what to do, or practice was very new. I think she understood the fact that we were trying to advocate for it, but she was very sensitive to don't pressure people, because I think of the orientation where she came from. And I would never want to pressure people to make them feel guilty, nor anyone in this room who chose otherwise, because I was one that started and then stopped at 3 to 4 months, and then started bottle feeding. I mean, I didn't do it either. My mother, on the other hand, who I found out after she knew I was working on this, said, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing something on breastfeeding. That's so wonderful. And I was like, Mom, I didn't know you were such a great breastfeeding advocate. She breastfed us we were over a year old by the time she quit. So I don't know, and that was a different generation, different culture, different generation. But yeah, I think that is. I think that, and the board, the board is pretty much, if you have a good hospital board, then they will pretty much support whatever the hospital is going to support. So it really rests in the Office of Administration to support breastfeeding initiatives. And if you have somebody that can speak to it and supports it, I think it just makes it easier for the hospital, and not just the Women's Center, but it helps to promote it throughout, the hospital. So when we have a lactation room for our employees, and I'll have to admit that, I was glad that we had a room, and it's a very nice room, but it's really kind of hard to get to. But at the time when we were designing the hospital, we really didn't give it a second thought that it wasn't any more public than it was. It's kind of like tucked in behind closed doors, and it's a nice room, but you have to get to it by way of, you have to have badge access. So it's not I wouldn't say it's the friendliest place. So when we redesign the new Women's Center, I hope that we take that into consideration. And I say that because we're getting ready to, we're too small. I work in a 40-bed hospital, and we're already at capacity. So we're going to double our size and give Women's Center more room, and we're going to pay attention to our lactation quarters for people who come in as outpatients as well as our employees. So